Morning from WNWN broadcast.
Tom Brady.
So proud of the fact that we are the most diverse. We also have to be proud that we're the most inclusive.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Salem State University Viking Voices podcast, where we highlight a sampling of the many great things going on at this exciting institution and among the alumni community. Our special guest of this episode is Helen Gifford, a 1970 graduate of Salem State with a Bachelor of Arts in English. Professionally, Helen Gifford, formerly known as Helen Ochterlony, has taken her journalism skills honed over many years to create a long career at the Salem News. Ms. Gifford has appeared on C-SPAN as part of a panel moderating the October 10, 2012 Massachusetts 6th District Congressional debate. It was a penultimate year of a seminal decade in American history. In the previous period, 3 beacons of hope had been gunned down. A generation of young Americans had been shattered by the Vietnam War. Unrest that still echoes across today's culture and politics roiled the country and the world. The Salem State community was not immune. Among notable incidents on the campus that year, one would gain national attention and played a role in the resignation of a leader who today is an iconic name on campus. Our guest, Helen Gifford, was a participant and first-hand witness. Helen Gifford, welcome to the SSU Viking Voices podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So you graduated in 1970, and before we talk about some of the events of 1969, 1970, please tell us a bit about what you remember most about Salem State.
For me, it was kind of like opening a window. I came here very kind of shy and naive, and I took wonderful courses that really changed my life and got involved in the student newspaper, and everything changed in the world those 4 years, and everything changed in my life those 4 years. So I just remember change most of all. You know, when I started on campus, the first week I was there, President Meyer was out in the quad sending people home for wearing jeans or girls for not wearing skirts. And by the time I graduated, that there was no dress code. You know?
Really?
we had curfews in the dorm and rules about you couldn't have a boy, couldn't go upstairs except once a month on a Sunday with the door open for 3 hours. But those rules were all gone by the time I graduated. And campus life was entirely different. The world, politics was entirely different, and I was different.
You graduated in 1970?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that was right height of the Vietnam War. Height of the, well, we probably didn't know that Watergate was going on, but it was going on, right? Right. So such an amazing time. Can we talk a little bit about then 1969 and the events of, and what was your memories of that fall semester?
It was wild. It started out very, in terms of politics, there were campus demonstrations, and we had just begun to see that the previous spring in '68. And many of us had got involved in that. And so things were heating up on campus. And then the newspaper, we started to get a little more edgy and write a little more controversial stuff. We heard about the Fitchburg Cycle, which was their college newspaper, and they had been shut down for publishing an article from Ramparts magazine by Eldridge Cleaver. It was an excerpt from the Black Moochie, which was a novella he wrote while he was in prison. And it had a lot of 4-letter words and sexual suggestion in it. And as a gesture of protest, 5 campus editors met here in Salem, and we talked about what we should do as a group, and we decided we would all print it. We printed ours, we got ours ready to go in the next edition. And the college president, who was Fred Meyer, found out about it and decided it would not be printed. I found out when I went to the printers the next morning to check on the copy and find out what time the papers would be coming, because people usually waited around for the papers on Fridays. They didn't leave for the weekend until they got their log. And the printer explained that he couldn't print it. He'd been threatened with a lawsuit if he did, and in any case, they weren't going to pay him. So when I got back to campus, we were called into the president's office and met with a few administrators, and they told us there was no way it was going to be published. And we said, well, let's go back to our office and figure out what to do, because we didn't want to be in that room, in that situation, and we decided no, we were going to publish anyway, some way or other. At that point, the College Publications Board got involved because they were there to oversee any kind of problems. There was a procedure if you thought material was doubtful. We never did. You could submit it to them and ask whether they thought it ought to be published. But we were not in any doubt that it was suitable for publication, so we published it, or we wanted to publish it. And when the president refused, we collected private donations, and we went to a couple of printers in Boston and found one who would print the independent log for us, and we printed that. And we put out 2 editions before the controversy was resolved. It was a wild ride, I have to tell you. I'd never been involved in anything this crazy. It got a lot of press attention, and I was one to sort of shy away from it. And Ellen Valello, who was our log advisor, she was an English faculty member, wonderful woman. We just say, Helen, call the Globe, call the Globe. Call the Globe every time something new happened, because he would escalate. The president would escalate different things. He would, for example, he sent a letter to different members of the College Board who are on the faculty and would ask them for written explanations of why they voted to censure him. And he sent the police to talk to us about disseminating material that was inappropriate for the Horace Mann Lab School next door.
I believe you said earlier that was actually the Vice Squad that he sent?
Yeah, well, it was vice detectives, whatever they. But we never met them. By that time, we had our own lawyers, and they just told us to get off campus, and they would handle it, and we never saw them. That was the end of it. We had lawyers because we had decided to join with Fitchburg in challenging the law. And initially, we were part of the lawsuit, and then the Student Association president, Brian O'Keefe, asked us to just interview these 2 lawyers they had found at Legal Aid Society. And they urged us not to do it. They said it could be a long haul getting things resolved if we went that way. And I don't honestly remember what all the other reasons they gave us were, but in the end we decided to go with them and do our own thing. So we had lawyers then who were representing us, and we were prepared to sue if we needed to, but in the meantime they were focused on getting some sort of resolution, short of a lawsuit, and getting the paper back up and running again. I think Fitchburg took the long view. They sued and they won, but they lost in the lower court. They didn't have a paper that year for most of the year, but in the end, it was wonderful because they got the law settled.
Went to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court?
It did, yes. And Judge Garrity ruled in favor of the newspaper, said you couldn't have prior restraint. So
freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all issues that today we're facing.
That's right.
In our country as well. So.
That's right. Things cycle back.
You said President Meyer was censured. What was that all about?
Oh, that was the College Publications Board censured him for refusing to let us publish. And they said there was a process that he was supposed to follow, or not necessarily that he was supposed to follow, but that the college was supposed to follow, and that was if editors had any doubts about suitability of something for print, we would submit it to the publication board, and they would determine. But it was left to the editors to determine whether you had any doubts, and we didn't. So we didn't submit it, and he insisted that he was going to shut it down anyway, and he did, and so they censured him.
As I understand it, he actually had people go around the campus, collect all the copies, and had them destroyed. Is that?
Yeah, that's what I heard, but we printed it in our independent edition anyway. I think part of his rationale was he kept saying that it was next door to the Horace Mann Laboratory School, and there were children around, and what if they got their hands on the paper and started reading it and saw those words? It would be just awful for them. But we always thought that was a pretext and that he was really playing to the Board of Trustees.
Well, it took me a while. I found a copy online of the old Rampart edition of the Eldridge Cleaver novella, and I mean, it's nothing more than you would see today on your average reality TV show, really. Certainly far less than some of the novels that were out at the time. Right?
It certainly is. Even some of the ones we read in class. I mean, but I don't know. I think it was just more of a control issue that he had a sense that he had the right to control what was being put out. He viewed it as a representation of the college, whereas we viewed it as a representation of the students. Right. It was a student newspaper. It was written by students. It was written for students. It was published by the Student Association. It was paid for with student activity fees. And we felt that it should be student controlled. And he looked on it as a college public relations vehicle, and he didn't want the wrong things in it.
Anything else you want to say about that period of time and that history?
Well, just that I guess it got me quite interested in newspapers. I already was, of course. I was very interested in the newspapers. I got involved out of, not for a desire to write so much, but because of things that were going on campus. I had been sitting in an English class, and a dean came in, interrupted the class, and hauled another kid out because his tuition was not fully paid up, which I thought was horrifying. The professor thought was horrifying. He canceled the rest of the class. He was so upset. And at that point, I had been thinking, maybe going over to the log office, and I walked over and volunteered to write a story, and that's how I got started. This also showed me how the media can help shape things and bring things to public attention, because we were suddenly involved with TV stations were coming here and filming things, and the New York Times showed up one day, and there were all these things that were driving the story and putting it into context beyond a few words in Eldridge Cleaver's story. I thought that was fascinating, and I wanted to be part of it.
Susan Edwards was here with us earlier, and she dragged out a copy of that article from the New York Times with a picture of you in it. I'll make a picture of that. I'll put it on the blog post related to this podcast. They're pretty amazing, especially at the time, all the controversy lately about fake news and giving the New York Times such a bad name. But at the time, New York Times was the paper of record.
They were the biggest paper in the country. The Washington Post hadn't bumped into Watergate yet, so they really were unrivaled, I think.
And there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, so everybody got the paper in the morning and read the news, and amazing. Yeah. So you fashioned a career in journalism based on your experiences here at Salem State. Have you always been with the Salem News?
No, I initially started with a tiny paper that no longer exists, a weekly called the Swampscott Reporter. And it happened the summer that I graduated. I was looking for a job and also toying with going to grad school. And the publisher of what was then the Marblehead Reporter called me up, said he'd followed the log stuff. He was starting a new weekly and wondered if I'd like to be a reporter. So I said, sure, and that was it. I moved on from there to some other weeklies. Then I went to North Shore Sunday, which was a new paper at the time in the 80s. And I just loved that. It was a little bit of an alternative paper, and we did a lot of investigative work, and it was great fun. When that was bought out by Fidelity, things changed. And that's when I moved to the Salem News, and I have loved it. I've been at the Salem News since 1994. And I still work part-time. I sort of gave up my job there and just am kind of a fill-in editor and helper now.
Thinking back to your time at Salem State, besides journalism, do you have other extracurricular activities that were your favorites? Or?
I didn't do much besides that. I did gymnastics. I was terrible at it, but I loved it. It was just a lot of fun. I liked being part of a team. I'd never been involved in sports. And so that really was the only other thing that I did with any regularity, because so much of my life was consumed with the newspaper. It was all consuming, and it was wonderful.
Did you have a job while you were a student?
Only my senior year, I started waitressing, and it was kind of funny because I was still working at the newspaper, and I waitressed at this restaurant in Marblehead called the Molly Waldo. And what I did not know was that was where many of the administrators would congregate to have off-campus discussions. So I would just sort of stay hidden and wipe down tables and got all sorts of information, and they never knew.
Where the source.
It was really funny, but that's all I did on campus. I didn't have work any of the other times.
Actually, the deep throat of.
Yeah.
You've been a witness to so many significant events in local history. What stands out over these years?
Oh, many things. I think one of the, aside from the sort of idiosyncratic things like the Danvers port explosion or things like that, the things that stand out are almost, they're reflections of what's going on in the world. We did a lot with the priest sex abuse crisis because it also happened in Salem. And we also had a deacon in Middleton who abused dozens and dozens of boys. And so those were big stories nationally. And then when you work at a local paper, which I've always loved, you get a piece of that and you see how it affects small communities too. The war in Afghanistan affected so many people here, and in fact, the Salem State community. One of my roommates in college had a daughter, Jennifer Harris, who was in the Marines and was killed in Afghanistan. She was a Marine helicopter pilot. And so covering those things, it's like a national story, but it hits locally, and you see in a microcosm how it affects things. And those are very meaningful and moving things to me. I love doing those.
Very active veterans group here on campus, and they do a lot of things for the veteran community. It's a big part of the student body. So
That's wonderful. That was just starting when I was here. There was a very small veterans group, but I'm glad to see that it grew.
can you tell me how Salem State has, beyond the fact that you became a journalist, how the education you got here has benefited you throughout your career?
Beyond the career, I just have to say, one of the things that was eye-opening for me was I took art and music courses my first year, and then I followed up with some later, art history and music history. And I have to say, of all the courses I took at Salem State, those were the ones that I look back on and think they changed my life. They gave me a window into something I knew nothing about and enriched everything. And I would never have thought to take courses like that. So that was just non-career related. But also the classes here, I was always a pretty good writer, but I got to be a better writer taking classes here and we had a faculty advisor the first couple of years at the log named Kay Jorgensen, who was a journalist. And she really helped in terms of it's a lead, just to reinforce this with one sentence here and it's going to be a better story. So that was really helpful. And then I think anytime you study English and history, it just makes you a better, more well-rounded, more well-disciplined person. And it helps any career that you're in.
Yes. Liberal arts get a bad rap these days, but from people I know who are in human resources and corporations, they're desperate for people who can put a sentence together, write a paragraph.
That's right. Even in journalism, now journalism degrees are common, but I always look to hire English majors, maybe because I was one, but I thought you can learn journalism. Right. It's not any kind of strange writing. If you can write, you can learn to be a journalist. And I always wanted that well-rounded person when we were hiring.
Have you kept any significant relationships since your time at Salem State?
Well, the most significant is my husband, who I met at Salem State. He also worked on the log. And he left midway and went into the Coast Guard before he was drafted because it was Vietnam War. And then he came back and finished his degree in 1975. And then over the years, I've been, in touch, of course, with Rosalie, who lost her daughter in Iraq, and Rosalie has passed too. Chris Kant was the first editor that I worked with here. He has also died, but I kept in touch with him for a long time. Sporadic touch with many of the others. I don't see many of them now. But we are on Facebook for whatever that is worth, which I don't think is much, but
Do you have any thoughts about the importance of student journalism today?
oh, I think it's so important. Whether it's digital or whether it's print, it not only does it bring your campus community together in one place, you have a common voice, even though those voices may disagree on a page or on a website or whatever. But you get to talk about things that aren't necessarily talked about and to investigate a little bit. There are always things that are going on that are interesting. We were talking earlier about the race relations here. Yes. A campus newspaper can have a huge role in something like that, in highlighting what's going on, in talking to people who are affected by it, in talking to people on the other side and explaining their views, and really illuminating stories and bringing things to print that, or to the page that people wouldn't have talked about maybe. And that's why you sort of do it. You hope to bring about a little bit of change and make a difference.
Wow. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to give to current or future Salem State students?
I guess one thing is it's one of the best times in your life, and enjoy every minute because it doesn't come back. Your life will be different after this, and what you do here will affect everything. The other thing that many people choose teaching or criminal justice. I chose journalism, but they're all ways that you hope that you can make a difference somehow. Some little way. Journalism, I think you're very fortunate because you get to start fresh every day. So if you screw up one day or you fail one day, you have the next day, you start all over again, and you can keep on trying. And so I would just hope that people try to make a difference in whatever way appeals to them, and just keep going for it.
Well, we're almost done as we've been talking here. If any thoughts came to mind of something you'd like to say before we conclude?
That sometimes you don't appreciate college when you're there. My time here was tumultuous. It was wonderful. Sometimes it seems more wonderful looking back because you're not in the moment and worrying about things going on. But they really are wonderful times. It's a tremendous privilege to be able to go to college. And I know it's more of a privilege now because it's so expensive now. And so we need to cherish the Salem States because they really provide a service.
Great thoughts. Well, Helen Gifford, thank you very much for being a guest on the Salem State University Viking Voices podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dear audience, thank you for listening to the Salem State University Viking Voices podcast. Join us soon for another episode to hear more about the many great things going on at this exciting institution and among the alumni community. Want to be a part of the many exciting things going on today at Salem State? There are many chances during the academic year to join Viking efforts to improve our communities, network with fellow alumni, students, faculty, community leaders, and to just have fun. Many of these events are free and open to the public. For a complete listing of events during the 2018-19 academic year, please visit salemstate.edu/calendar. Whether your passions run to arts, culture, politics, sports, and more, there's something for every taste. Examples this semester include premiering November 29th and running through December 9th, the Sophia Gordon Center for the Creative and Performing Arts features Poison of Choice. This theatrical performance places the audience inside a graphic novel in a world that reeks of political corruption, sex, murder, addiction, and plenty of moral ambiguity. On December 6th, public historians and scholars Cheryl Harned and Matthew Barlow will share their research on issues of trauma and memory at Viking Hall, Central Campus from 4:30 to 6. The Alto Voce Treble Chorus presents a concert version of Humperdinck's classic opera Hansel and Gretel on December 10th from 7:30 to 9. December 15th and 16th, the Salem Dance Ensemble presents its end-of-semester concert featuring original choreography by dance students, dance faculty Betsy Miller, as well as guest choreographer Aisha Upchurch. This event takes place at the Sophia Gordon Center from 7:30 to 9. In sports this fall, competitions in basketball, field hockey, ice hockey, soccer, tennis, and more take place. Some sporting events require a modest entrance fee that goes to support the athletic programs. Upcoming at the O'Keefe Center, on December 4, men's ice hockey takes on Connecticut College. Men's basketball faces MIT on December 6. December 8, women's ice hockey meets New England College, while at the same night, women's basketball will give their all against Endicott College. These are just a few of the highlights of the fall 2018 semester. Remember, you can check out all the events at salemstate.edu/calendar. Another way to be a part and to be a force in the expansion and continuation of the mission of Salem State University is to donate to the Salem State Foundation. The foundation, incorporated in 1977, is a 501(c) private not-for-profit organization. Contributions to the foundation directly support Salem State's mission to provide high-quality, student-centered education that prepares a diverse community of learners to contribute responsibly and creatively to a global society. And the foundation serves as a resource to advance the region's cultural, social, and economic development. For more information on the foundation, please visit salemstate.edu/alumni-and-friends/Salem-State-Foundation. Fellow Vikings and those interested in Salem State University, we hope that you have enjoyed this edition of the Salem State University Viking Voices podcast. Please remember that you can follow SSU Viking Voices podcast almost anywhere you get your podcasts, and you can subscribe on iTunes. Please use social media to give us your likes, send us your comments, share us as appropriate. Thank you for listening. This is Guy Clinch wishing you all a very Viking day.